My wife called me ugly in front of her rich friends and dumped me at a restaurant on her birthday, leaving me to pay for the dinner for 15 people. As she walked away, she loudly said, "A man like you should be grateful I even dated you." I smiled and calmly waited. This morning my phone blew up with 139 missed calls. So here's the thing about ironing a blazer twice. It's not because you're anal about wrinkles. It's because you're trying to iron away the voice in your head that keeps whispering, "You don't belong here." And honestly, that voice has been getting louder every damn day for the past 2 years. But tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight was Ria's birthday, and I was going to show up looking like I actually deserved to breathe the same air as her trust fund friends. The lilies were my masterstroke, or so I thought. White ones, because Ria mentioned once, and I mean once, like 6 months ago while we were walking past some fancy hotel lobby. That lilies make any room feel expensive. Yeah, I'm the kind of guy who files away random comments like that, cataloging them for future use like some pathetic emotional accountant. Sue me for trying to make my girlfriend happy on her birthday. The restaurant was exactly what you'd expect from someone who thinks regular people are background characters in her life story. Marble floors that probably cost more than my car, swallowing every sound except the gentle clink of overpriced silverware and the hushed conversations of people who never had to check their bank balance before ordering dessert. Those light fixtures hanging overhead, shaped like champagne bubbles, because of course they were. Subtlety isn't really a thing when you're trying to remind everyone how much money you have. Her crew was already assembled when I walked in, looking like they'd been posed by some sadistic lifestyle photographer. There was Sloane, dripping in what I'm pretty sure were actual diamonds wrapped around her wrists like tiny handcuffs made of sparkle. She gives off this vibe like she's doing you a favor just by acknowledging your existence. Then there's Armand, who was already warming up his vocal cords for another round of humble bragging about his little side project, which, from what I could gather, involved buying buildings and then acting surprised when they made him money. Bianca sat there wrapped in some silk cape thing that probably cost more than most people's rent, looking like she was auditioning for the role of mysterious rich woman in a movie no one would want to watch. And Victor, Jesus, Victor, who has this charming habit of calling every waiter, bartender, and service worker champ, like he's some benevolent sports coach instead of a guy whose biggest accomplishment is inheriting his dad's investment firm. Don't even get me started on Talia, who was already angling her phone to catch the perfect candid moment, because apparently nothing exists unless it's documented for her Instagram followers. I swear this woman treats real life like it's just content waiting to be curated. And there I was, taking the last chair at the end of the table. Not because I was late. I'm never late. But because that's where they put me. Every single time. The symbolic end of the table, like I'd been seated there on purpose, which, let's be honest, I probably had been. Ria made her entrance 20 minutes after the reservation time, because punctuality is for peasants, I guess. She swept in with this practiced elegance that she's perfected over years of making sure everyone notices when she arrives. The air kiss she planted near my cheek was so precisely calculated it could have been choreographed. Not too intimate, not too distant, just enough to acknowledge my existence without actually having to touch me. "Looking good, ugly," she announced as I stood to pull out her chair, her voice carrying just enough volume to make sure the entire table heard her little pet name for me. The laughter that followed wasn't the warm, inclusive kind you hope for at birthday dinners. It was that sharp, glittery sound that rich people make when they're enjoying someone else's discomfort. And that's when the real show started. Because apparently, my birthday gift to Rio wasn't the carefully chosen present I'd wrapped, or the flowers, or even showing up looking as decent as my budget would allow. No, my gift was serving as the evening's entertainment. "Oh my God, Julian, is that tie from Target?" Sloane asked, her voice dripping with the kind of fake concern that makes you want to throw your drink in someone's face. "It's so earnest." "Hey, nothing wrong with budget-friendly fashion," Armand chimed in, because he's never met a moment he couldn't make worse. "Shows character. Real men who don't need to grow up with daddy's money. Right, Julian?" "They right, Julian?" Part was my favorite touch, like I was supposed to thank him for the compliment wrapped in condescension. These people had turned passive aggression into an art form. Victor raised his glass then, that shit-eating grin spreading across his face like he was about to deliver the punchline to the world's longest setup. "Here's to freedom and finer things." he declared, making direct eye contact with me. And to friends who know the difference. They all drank to that. Even Rhea. Especially Rhea. I sat there, cutting my overpriced steak and wondering when exactly I'd become the designated punching bag for this group of overgrown trust fund babies. Every joke landed like a small knife, precise and practiced. They'd clearly done this before, maybe not to me specifically, but to someone. There's always someone at the bottom of the social food chain, and tonight, that someone was me. The worst part? I could see other diners at nearby tables starting to notice. The way conversations gradually died down, the subtle glances in our direction. These people weren't just humiliating me. They were doing it with an audience, turning my embarrassment into dinner theater. When the bill finally arrived, and Jesus Christ, 3 pages long, it landed in front of me like it had never occurred to anyone else that they might be expected to pay for their own meals. 3 pages of itemized extravagance. Bottles of wine that cost more than my monthly groceries, appetizers I didn't even know existed, desserts with names I couldn't pronounce. Rhea slid it across the table to me with the casual indifference you'd use to pass a used napkin. No discussion. No, should we split this? No acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, the birthday girl could contribute to her own celebration. A man like you should be grateful I even dated you, she said, her voice pitched loud enough to carry to the neighboring tables. The words hit like a slap, delivered with surgical precision in front of an audience of strangers who were now definitely watching our little drama unfold. She stood then, gathering her entourage like some socialite Pied Piper, leaving behind nothing but the lingering scent of her expensive perfume and the echo of their laughter as they swept out of the restaurant. I sat there alone, staring at a bill that represented more money than I usually spent in 2 months, surrounded by empty chairs and the judgment of people I'd never see again. I paid it. Not because I'm weak, though I'm sure that's how it looked to anyone watching. Not because I thought it was fair, or right, or even reasonable. I paid it because in that moment, I needed quiet more than I needed justice. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out what the hell I was going to do next. Because here's the thing about quiet. It lets a plan breathe. And brother, I was about to need a really good plan. I could have called an Uber. Hell, I could have called a regular cab and been home in 15 minutes, nursing my wounded pride in the privacy of my own apartment like any normal person would after getting publicly humiliated by their girlfriend and her merry band of trust fund assholes. But normal wasn't what I needed right then. I needed the city to talk to me, and the city only talks when you're walking. So I walked 37 blocks through downtown, past the late-night food trucks serving actual humans instead of whatever the hell we'd been eating at that marble mausoleum. Past the bodega where Mrs. Chin always asks if I'm eating enough, and the dive bar where people laugh at jokes instead of at each other. Real places. Places where a 3-page dinner bill would cause actual heart attacks instead of casual shrugs. The city lights weren't trying to impress anyone tonight. They were just doing their job, cutting through the darkness with honest fluorescence. No champagne bubble fixtures or artisanal ambience. Just good old-fashioned electricity working overtime to keep the streets safe for idiots like me who needed to think while they walked. Every step replayed her words. A man like you should be grateful I even dated you. The phrase had this weird rhythm to it, like she'd practiced it, like she'd been saving it up for just the right moment, when she'd have the perfect audience to witness my destruction. And you know what? It worked. Those words followed me down every block, echoing off the buildings until they stopped sounding like an insult and started sounding like clarity. Because here's the thing about walking 37 blocks with someone's cruelty playing on repeat in your head. Eventually, it stops hurting and starts teaching. Every step was sharpening something inside me that I didn't even know had gotten dull. 2 years of making excuses for her behavior, of telling myself she was just particular or high maintenance, of accepting that maybe I really wasn't good enough for her world. But walking gives you perspective. And perspective was telling me that a woman who could humiliate her boyfriend in public for sport wasn't particular. She was just mean. Rich mean, which somehow makes it worse because it's so goddamn unnecessary. When I finally got home, the first thing I saw were those white lilies I'd brought her, sitting abandoned on my kitchen counter like forgotten soldiers. I filled a vase with water, because even rejected flowers deserve better than dying of thirst, and arranged them carefully. They were still beautiful, even if they'd been dismissed along with everything else about my pathetic attempt to belong in her world. Then I did something I'd never done before. I wrote down the total, grabbed a sticky note, wrote $847.32 in blue ink, and stuck it right on my bathroom mirror where I'd see it every morning. Not because I'm masochistic, but because I needed a reminder. A daily dose of reality about exactly what it cost to play along with Ria's games. That's when the math started. Not the restaurant bill math. That was just one night's worth of damage. I'm talking about the real math. The 2-year calculation of what it actually cost to date someone who treated generosity like stupidity and kindness like weakness. I pulled out my laptop and started adding things up, and Jesus Christ, the numbers were worse than I'd thought. 2 years of jokes about my face. Because apparently I'm endearingly ugly, which sounds like a compliment until you realize you're hearing it in front of strangers. 2 years of casual comments about my job, my clothes, my car, my apartment, always delivered with that little laugh that was supposed to make it okay. 2 years of thinking that patience would somehow soften her edges, that if I just stuck around long enough, she'd realize I was worth keeping around for something other than comic relief and bill paying. But I'm not poor in spirit, I realized, sitting there in my quiet apartment with my rescue flowers and my growing pile of evidence. I'm deliberate. There's a difference between being broke and being careful, between being humble and being a doormat. I'd been confusing the two for way too long. I opened a folder on my desktop that I'd never needed before, call it the Ria Reality Check folder. Started screenshotting text conversations where she mocked me to her friends, thinking I wouldn't see them. Saved receipts from all those times my credit card covered her teams, nights out at places I couldn't afford. Downloaded bank statements showing transfers to her account labeled emergency that somehow always coincided with her wanting something expensive. The evidence was all there, like breadcrumbs leading back to the house made of financial abuse and emotional manipulation. I'd just been too busy trying to be the perfect boyfriend to notice I was actually being the perfect Mark. I made a list, because I'm that kind of guy, the kind who makes lists when his world is falling apart. Names first, Sloane, with her diamond tennis bracelets and surgical precision insults. Armand, the humble bragger who'd never worked a day in his life but loved giving advice about real work. Bianca, draped in silk and superiority. Victor, who probably practiced calling people champ in the mirror. Talia, documenting every moment of my humiliation for posterity. And Rin and Gideon, peripheral players in Ria's drama, but players nonetheless. Then places, Midnight Room, where she'd taken her friends for girls' nights, that somehow always required my credit card. Gray Finch, the rooftop bar where she liked to be seen. Argent House, where she held court like some kind of social media princess. All of it mapped out like a military campaign, because that's what it had been, wasn't it? A systematic campaign to see exactly how much humiliation I'd accept in exchange for the privilege of dating someone who thought she was doing me a favor. That's when I picked up the phone and made 2 calls. Not to lawyers or therapists or anyone who'd try to talk me out of what I was thinking. I called the only 2 people I trust completely, my sister Amma and my friend Rafi. Amma picked up on the second ring, because she's a pediatric nurse and nurses don't sleep like normal people. Julian? What's wrong? No small talk, no pretense. Just immediate concern, because that's who she is. It's time, I said simply. Time to stop apologizing for existing. She was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that means she's listening to everything I'm not saying along with everything I am. What do you need? She asked finally. Witness, I said. Someone to remind me I'm not crazy. You're not crazy, she said immediately. You're just finally awake. Rafi was harder to wake up, but once I explained the situation, he was all business. You sure about this? He asked, and I could hear him already firing up his laptop in the background. I'm sure I'm tired of being the punchline to her joke, I said. Good, he said, because I've been waiting 2 years for you to get pissed off enough to do something about it. That was Rafi, quiet, methodical, and apparently keeping track of my relationship disasters better than I was. He'd seen it all, watched me make excuses for behavior that would have sent any reasonable person running for the hills. Tomorrow, I told them both. We start tomorrow. I hung up and looked around my apartment, really looked at it. It wasn't much, but it was honest. No marble floors or champagne bubble light fixtures, Just a place where a man could think clearly and plan carefully. Where white lilies could sit in a simple vase and be beautiful without needing to prove anything to anyone. For the first time in 2 years, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The quiet was different now, not empty, but full of possibility, full of plans that were just starting to breathe. Rafi showed up at my door the next morning looking like he'd raided a Best Buy clearance rack, old laptop under one arm, legal pad tucked under the other, and that expression he gets when he's about to dive deep into someone else's digital mess. The guy's a walking contradiction, messy hair, wrinkled t-shirt, but a mind that organizes information like he's running some kind of human filing system. Coffee first, or revenge first? He asked, settling into my kitchen chair like he planned to be there all day. Both, I said, because honestly, I'd been up since 5 thinking about everything I'd ignored for the past 2 years. But let's call it justice. Revenge sounds petty. He snorted. Dude, after what you told me last night, Petty would be keying her car. This is just accounting. That's Rafi for you. Always finding the perfect word for whatever situation you're drowning in. Accounting. Like my relationship had been one long, expensive math problem that I'd somehow been failing to solve. We spread everything out on my kitchen table. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts I'd been shoving into a drawer because looking at them made my chest tight. 2 years of financial evidence that painted a pretty clear picture of how someone can systematically drain another person's resources while making them feel grateful for the privilege. Jesus, Julian, Rafi muttered, scrolling through my credit card statements. She charged spa days to your card? What kind of spa days cost $400? The kind where you get your conscience removed, apparently, I said, watching him cross-reference dates with his legal pad. The man takes notes like he's preparing for the bar exam. Neat handwriting filling up page after page with timestamps, amounts, and locations. He wasn't being dramatic about the process. That's not his style. Rafi approaches everything like he's defusing a bomb. Careful, methodical, no wasted motion. While I was pacing around the kitchen making my 3rd cup of coffee, he was building what he called the foundation. Look at this pattern, he said, pointing at a series of charges from last fall. Every Thursday night, same restaurant, same approximate total. But you were working late Thursdays, right? That job training program. I nodded, remembering those endless sessions learning new software while Ria was supposedly having girls' dinners at places that charged $50 for a salad. Girls' dinners, my ass, Rafi said, pulling up Instagram on his phone. Look at these photos. That's not 5 girls splitting apps. That's 15 people doing bottle service. And there it was, documented in high-definition social media glory. Ria's intimate girls' nights that somehow always included half her social circle and a champagne tower that probably cost more than my monthly rent. All charged to my card while I was across town learning Excel shortcuts and thinking she was having innocent catch-up dinners with her friends. The luxury car rentals are my personal favorite, Rafi continued, highlighting entries with a yellow marker. BMW for the weekend, charged to your card, but check out her posts. She's telling everyone it's a work necessity for client meetings. I pulled up the photos he was referencing. Ria posing against a sleek black convertible, caption reading, "When you have to look the part for success. #BossLife, #client meeting." Except I happened to know that particular weekend was when she went wine tasting in Napa with Sloan and Bianca. No clients in sight, just 3 trust fund princesses pretending they'd earned their champagne lifestyle. She's got a whole system going, I said, starting to see the bigger picture. Make it sound like it's for work. Make it sound necessary. Make me feel like I'm investing in our future. Our future, your money, Rafi corrected, because he's never been one to sugarcoat reality. Look at this wire transfer to Ren's Events Company. $5,000, labeled emergency contribution. You remember what emergency that was? I did remember. Ria crying in my kitchen, explaining how her friend Ren was about to lose his event planning business. How just this once, couldn't we help out someone who'd been so good to us? How it was really an investment because Ren would totally pay us back once his next big client came through. Spoiler alert, Rafi said, scrolling through more social media posts. Ren threw a party that weekend that cost more than most people's weddings. Your $5,000 helped pay for ice sculptures shaped like swans. Ice sculptures shaped like swans. funded by my emergency contribution to save a business that was apparently doing just fine. We spent the next 3 hours mapping what Rafi called the ecosystem. Every suspicious charge got cross-referenced with social media posts, geotagged locations, and timestamps. It was like watching a magic trick in reverse. All the sleight of hand exposed, all the misdirection laid bare. The spa day that supposedly helped her prepare for difficult clients happened on a Tuesday when she posted 17 Instagram stories of herself getting champagne facials with Talia. The work wardrobe investment that maxed out my credit card coincided perfectly with a shopping spree she documented in real time, trying on designer dresses while laughing about retail therapy. "This one's my favorite," Rafi said, pointing to a particularly damning entry. "Midnight room, 2:13 a.m., $467. Your card." But look at the timestamp on her story. She posted herself doing shots with Victor and Armand at exactly 2:15 a.m. The charge was labeled Midnight Room. VIP hold, which sounded official enough until you realized it was just Rhea buying rounds for her crew while I was home asleep, thinking she was having a quiet night in with Bianca. "If you want this to land clean," Rafi said finally, sitting back in his chair and surveying our paper explosion, "you don't shout. You show." That's when Amma called, her voice coming through my phone speaker with that particular tone she uses when she's trying not to say, "I told you so." "How bad is it?" she asked, because she's a nurse and nurses cut straight through bullshit to get to the important stuff. "Bad enough that I feel stupid for not seeing it sooner," I admitted, looking at the evidence spread across my table like some kind of financial crime scene. "You're not stupid," she said firmly. "You're trusting. There's a difference. Stupid people don't collect evidence. Stupid people don't have friends who show up with laptops and legal pads. Stupid people don't call their sisters for reality checks." She had a point. A stupid person would have just taken the humiliation, paid the bills, and kept hoping things would get better. A stupid person wouldn't be sitting in his kitchen at noon on a Saturday, methodically documenting 2 years of systematic financial manipulation. "If you put the truth in front of people gently," Amma continued, "they can't blink it away." "But Julian, you need to eat something. You sound like you're running on coffee and rage." I realized she was right. I'd been shaking for the past hour, and it wasn't from caffeine. It was from finally seeing the whole picture, from understanding exactly how thoroughly I'd been played. Rafi closed his laptop and looked at me with the satisfaction of a man who'd just solved a particularly complicated puzzle. "We've got enough here to write a book," he said. "Question is, what do you want to do with it?" I looked at the evidence. Pages of cross-referenced data, printed screenshots, highlighted bank statements that told the story of how someone can steal your dignity along with your money, one emergency at a time. "I want to show her exactly what I've been paying for," I said. After Rafi left, I sat in my kitchen staring at the organized chaos we'd created. Neat piles of evidence that told the story of how I'd been systematically played for 2 years. But here's the thing about evidence. It's only as good as your delivery system. In Rhea's world, it doesn't run on facts or logic or basic human decency. It runs on something much more fragile and infinitely more powerful: image. See, people like Rhea and her crew aren't actually rich in the way that matters. Sure, they've got money, some inherited, some married into, some stumbled into through sheer dumb luck and good timing. But what they really have is the appearance of having it all figured out. They're professional lifestyle curators, and their entire social ecosystem depends on everyone believing the performance. Strip away the performance, and what's left? A bunch of insecure adults playing dress-up with daddy's credit card. So I made another list. Not financial this time, strategic. I wrote down the 3 pillars holding up Rhea's carefully constructed image, the events that mattered most to her sense of social supremacy. First, her birthday brunch with her family next weekend. The annual gathering where she gets to play the successful daughter, the one who's figured out life and found herself a stable boyfriend. I'd been to 4 of these brunches, always seated next to her grandmother Ajie, always complimented on being such a good influence on Rhea. The family loved me because I made Rhea seem grounded, responsible, mature. I was her human character reference, proof that she could maintain a relationship with someone who had actual substance. Second, Gideon's charity mixer. her boss's big annual event where all the firm's power players gathered to congratulate themselves on how philanthropic they were while writing off their donations as tax breaks. Rhea had been talking about this event for months, planning her outfit, her talking points, her social media strategy. It was her chance to shine in front of the people who controlled her career trajectory, to prove she belonged in their world of manufactured compassion and strategic networking. Third, Sloane's podcast taping. Leveling up, becoming her, because apparently Sloane had decided she was qualified to give life advice despite never having worked a day in her life. Rhea was going to be the featured guest in an episode about authentic relationships and finding your equal. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but irony doesn't pay the bills in influencer land. I knew the venues, the times, the guest lists, because Rhea documented everything. Her social media presence was like a detailed itinerary for anyone who wanted to find her at her most vulnerable moments. She'd trained me to pay attention to these details, to be her personal photographer and social media manager, always ready with the perfect angle to capture her candid moments. For each pillar, I wrote a small plan. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would make me look like the crazy ex-boyfriend having a public meltdown. Just small, exact truths arriving in the right room at the right moment. The kind of truths that would make people pause, reconsider, maybe ask a few questions they'd never thought to ask before. See, the beautiful thing about people who live for appearances is that they're absolutely terrified of anything that might crack their carefully maintained facade. They'll go to extraordinary lengths to avoid even the slightest hint of public embarrassment, because their entire sense of self-worth is tied up in what other people think of them. That's when I remembered Mira. Sweet, quiet Mira who used to work as a junior at Rhea's firm until she decided to pursue other opportunities, which is corporate speak for got pushed out by someone who took credit for her work. I'd found her crying in my kitchen one night, explaining how Rhea had presented Myra's entire client strategy as her own, how there was nothing she could do about it, because who was going to believe the junior associate over the golden girl with connections? Mira had quit the next week, but not before she'd quietly documented everything. Because that's what smart people do when they're getting screwed, they keep records. I pulled out my phone and typed carefully. If you ever wanted to tell the truth, I'll be wherever you feel safe. The 3 dots appeared immediately, then disappeared, then appeared again. I could practically feel her internal debate through the screen. The war between wanting justice and not wanting to rock the boat, between standing up for herself and playing it safe. Then, nothing. Radio silence. I put my phone face down on the table and kept working. Mira would make her own choice in her own time, and I couldn't force her hand. But I could make sure that if she decided to speak up, she'd have someone in her corner who understood exactly what it felt like to be dismissed and discredited by Rhea's particular brand of casual cruelty. The thing about building a case against someone who's hurt you is that it forces you to relive all the moments you'd rather forget. Going through those social media posts, cross-referencing dates and locations, watching her perform happiness while systematically destroying mine. It was like getting punched in the gut repeatedly, except this time I was throwing the punches myself. But here's what I'd learned from 2 years of being Rhea's emotional punching bag. Sometimes you have to hurt yourself a little bit to stop someone else from hurting you a lot. Sometimes you have to wade through your own humiliation to find the tools you need to make it stop. I spent the rest of the afternoon mapping out her social calendar, identifying the moments when she'd be most exposed, most invested in maintaining her image. The birthday brunch where her family would be watching, evaluating, deciding whether I was still worthy of their approval. The charity mixer where her professional reputation was on the line. The podcast taping where she'd have to perform authenticity in front of people who made their living spotting fake. Each event represented a crack in her armor, a moment when the truth could slip through and do some actual damage to the facade she'd spent years constructing. Not permanent damage, I'm not a monster, but enough to make her understand that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people like disposable entertainment without eventually paying the price. By evening, I had 3 neat folders labeled with dates and locations. Inside each one, copies of relevant financial records, screenshots of contradictory social media posts, and detailed timelines that painted a picture of systematic deception and manipulation. My phone buzzed once. A text from an unknown number. Library. Tomorrow. 2 p.m. 3rd floor. I smiled. Mira had made her choice. The truth was starting to gather momentum, and momentum, once it gets going, is a beautiful thing to watch. I was standing in my kitchen the next morning, trying to convince myself that instant coffee was just as good as the real thing, which it absolutely isn't. But when you've just spent $847.32 on someone else's birthday humiliation, you make adjustments. When my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Now, normally, I don't answer unknown numbers because 99% of the time it's either someone trying to extend my car's warranty or some telemarketer who's convinced I desperately need solar panels. But something about the timing felt significant, like maybe the universe was finally ready to throw me a bone after 48 hours of emotional carnage. Is this Julian Martinez? The voice was professional but cautious, like someone who'd been practicing this conversation in their head. Yeah, that's me. Who's asking? This is David Chow from Lumiere, the restaurant. I'm the manager who was working Saturday night during the incident. The incident? That's what we were calling it now. Like Ria's public execution of my dignity was some kind of unfortunate accident, a minor slip-up in an otherwise perfectly orchestrated evening. Mr. Martinez, I wanted to call personally to apologize, he continued, and I could hear genuine discomfort in his voice. What happened at your table on Saturday? That's not the kind of experience we want any of our guests to have at Lumiere. I sat down at my kitchen table, because this conversation was already more consideration than I'd gotten from anyone in Ria's orbit over the past 2 years. Appreciate that, Mr. Chow. Please, call me David. And I want you to know that several members of our staff mentioned how uncomfortable they felt watching the situation unfold. The way you handled yourself with such grace under pressure. Well, it didn't go unnoticed. Grace under pressure. That was a nice way of saying I'd sat there and taken my beating like a well-trained dog. But you know what? I'd take it. After being called ugly and grateful in front of a restaurant full of strangers, being told I'd shown grace felt like winning the lottery. The thing is, David continued, we pride ourselves on creating an atmosphere where all our guests feel respected and valued. What happened at your table was the opposite of that, and frankly, it reflected poorly on our establishment that we allowed it to continue. Now this was interesting, because David Chow wasn't just apologizing, he was covering his ass. Smart restaurants don't want to become known as places where rich people can publicly humiliate their dates for entertainment. Bad for business, bad for reputation, bad for the kind of clientele who actually tip well instead of just spending ostentatiously. I'd like to offer you a partial credit toward your next visit, he said. It's not much, but it's our way of trying to make this right. I almost laughed. A partial credit for my next visit to the scene of my romantic assassination. That's generous of you, David, but I don't think I'll be coming back anytime soon. That night pretty much cured me of fancy restaurants. He was quiet for a moment, then said something that surprised me. I understand completely. But Mr. Martinez, if it helps at all, I want you to know that everyone at our staff meeting agreed. You deserved better than what happened that night. Everyone at their staff meeting, which meant my humiliation had been significant enough to warrant discussion among the entire restaurant staff. Wonderful. I'd achieved something I'd never aspired to, becoming a cautionary tale for service workers about difficult customers and their collateral damage. Actually, David, there is something you could do for me, I said, because sometimes opportunities present themselves in the most unexpected ways. Could I get an itemized digital receipt for that night? Something with details about what was ordered and when. Of course, he said immediately. I'll have that sent to your email within the hour. Is there anything specific you needed to show? Just the facts, I said. Timestamps, seat numbers, who ordered what. The truth is usually pretty helpful when you need to understand what really happened. Absolutely. And Mr. Martinez? For what it's worth, I've been in this business for 15 years, and I've seen a lot of difficult situations. What I saw Saturday night wasn't you being difficult. What I saw was you being taken advantage of, and I'm sorry we didn't step in sooner. After I hung up, I sat there staring at my phone like it might have more surprises hidden in its circuits. David Chow had just given me something I hadn't expected, validation from a neutral third party. Someone who'd witnessed the whole thing and come to the same conclusion I had. That what happened wasn't normal relationship drama. It was systematic cruelty performed for an audience. True to his word, the email showed up 47 minutes later. The subject line read, Lumiere, itemized receipt, Table 12, Saturday evening. I opened it with the kind of anticipation you usually reserve for lottery numbers or medical test results. Holy shit. The receipt was a thing of beauty. 3 pages of forensic detail that read like a crime scene report written in restaurant terminology. Every item was time-stamped. Every seat was numbered. Every modification and substitution was documented with surgical precision. Seat 3, Sloan Spot, had indeed ordered 3 bottles of Cristal at $180 each. Not one bottle split among friends, but 3 separate bottles for her personal consumption. The timestamps showed she'd ordered them 20 minutes apart, which meant she'd been getting progressively more drunk and probably more vicious as the evening wore on. Seat 9, Victor's Throne, had sent back a $60 steak for being too pink at 8:47 p.m. and ordered a replacement, then sent that one back for being too well done at 9:23 p.m. before finally accepting a third attempt at 9:58 p.m. The man had turned ordering dinner into performance art, probably enjoying every moment of making the kitchen staff jump through hoops for his entertainment. But the real masterpiece was Seat 12, Ria's command center. The receipt showed she'd approved something called a birthday tasting flight for the table at 8:15 p.m. A $340 add-on that included artisanal chocolates, premium champagne, and what appeared to be some kind of dessert course that involved gold leaf. Gold leaf, because regular dessert wasn't expensive enough for her special day. The timestamps told the whole story. 7:30 p.m., cocktails ordered for everyone. 7:45 p.m., appetizers for the table, charged to my card. 8 p.m., entrees ordered. 8:15 p.m., Ria's birthday, tasting flight approved. 8:30 p.m., additional wine pairings requested. 9:15 p.m., after-dinner drinks ordered. 9:45 p.m., bill requested and delivered to my seat. 2 hours and 15 minutes of systematic financial extraction, documented down to the minute. But here's what really got me. The receipt showed that when the bill was delivered, there'd been a 15-minute gap before payment was processed. 15 minutes of me sitting there, alone at that table, while Ria and her entourage had their dramatic exit. 15 minutes of me staring at that 3-page bill while other diners watched and whispered. I forwarded the receipt to Rafi with a simple message. Evidence pile, meets smoking gun. Then I did something I'd been putting off since Saturday night. I called my bank. Hi. I'd like to report some concerns about fraudulent patterns on my credit card. I said to the customer service representative, using the calm, patient tone I'd perfected during 2 years of dealing with Ria's financial emergencies. Of course, sir. Can you describe the nature of your concerns? Someone's been using my card for personal expenses without my explicit consent, often for amounts and at locations that don't match what I was told the charges would be for. I'd like to freeze the card and get a replacement expedited. I can certainly help you with that. How long has this pattern been going on? I looked at the evidence spread across my kitchen table, bank statements, receipts, screenshots, and now David Chow's beautifully detailed documentation of my public humiliation. About 2 years, I said, but I'm just now ready to do something about it. 20 minutes later, my credit card was frozen, a replacement was being overnight, and I had a reference number for what the bank cheerfully called a fraud investigation. Not vengeance. Containment. Ria's machine could keep spinning all it wanted, but it wasn't going to run on my fuel anymore. You know that feeling when you're watching a house of cards start to wobble, and you're not sure whether you want to steady it or give it one final push. That was me, sitting in my apartment that afternoon, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Because when you cut off someone's financial supply line, especially someone as entitled as Ria, the reaction is usually swift and predictable. What I didn't expect was for that reaction to come through her mother. Nalini called at exactly 3:17 p.m., which I know because I'd been staring at my phone like it was about to detonate. The woman has a voice that could sell insurance to a dead man, smooth, controlled, with just enough warmth to make you think she actually gives a damn about your well-being. Julian, darling, she began, because Nalini never met a conversation she couldn't open with false intimacy. I hope you're having a lovely afternoon. It's been educational, I said, which was true. Learning exactly how much money someone can spend on your credit card while simultaneously destroying your self-esteem had been quite the crash course in human psychology. I'm calling because Ria mentioned there was an unfortunate misunderstanding at dinner Saturday night, she continued. and I had to give her credit for creativity. Calling my public humiliation a misunderstanding was like calling the Titanic a minor shipping delay. That's one way to put it, I said, settling back in my chair because I could tell this was going to be a performance worth witnessing. You know how public events can be, Nalini said, her voice taking on that practiced tone that politicians use when they're explaining away scandals. Sometimes emotions run high, people say things they don't mean, situations get complicated. Complicated, right? Because having your girlfriend call you ugly in front of a restaurant full of strangers while sticking you with a bill for 15 people is just your garden variety relationship complexity. I understand public events can be challenging, I said, matching her diplomatic tone. That's actually why I've decided I won't be attending any future events where I might cause similar complications. There was a pause, the kind of pause that happens when someone realizes their carefully rehearsed script has just gone off the rails. I'm sorry, what exactly are you saying? Nalini asked, and for the first time in 2 years of knowing her, she sounded genuinely caught off guard. I'm saying I understand my presence can be disruptive to Ria's social gatherings, I said, enjoying the way I could hear her mental gears grinding through the phone. So I'm removing that source of disruption. Another pause, longer this time. When she spoke again, the sugar coating was starting to crack around the edges. Julian, I think you might be overreacting to what was essentially a minor social awkwardness. Young couples have disagreements. It's perfectly normal. Minor social awkwardness. Jesus, this woman could spin straw into gold if she put her mind to it. You're probably right, I said, because sometimes the best way to win an argument is to agree with someone while doing the exact opposite of what they want. That's why I think it's best if I step back from situations where these awkwardnesses might occur. But we have the family birthday brunch on Sunday, she said, and there it was, the real reason for the call. Not concern for my feelings or worry about my relationship with her daughter. Just panic that their carefully orchestrated family performance might be missing its most important prop, the stable boyfriend who made Ria look like a functioning adult. I know, I said simply, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Julian, Nalini said, her voice shifting into what I recognized as her closing the deal tone. I think you're letting pride interfere with good judgment. Relationships require compromise, flexibility. Sometimes we have to overlook small slights for the greater good. Small slights. Getting publicly humiliated and stuck with an $847 bill was apparently just a small slight in the world, according to Nalini. I wondered what she'd consider a major slight. Maybe if Ria had set me on fire instead of just roasting me verbally. I appreciate the relationship advice, I said, but I think I've been plenty flexible for the past 2 years. Maybe it's time for someone else to try bending a little. The silence that followed was so thick I could practically hear her recalibrating, trying to figure out which lever to pull next in her manipulation machine. We'll expect you Sunday at noon, she said finally, dropping all pretense of asking. Wear something appropriate. You know how a G likes to see you dressed nicely. And there was the kill shot, invoking a G, the one person in Ria's family who'd ever treated me like I was worth more than the sum of my credit limit. Classic manipulation tactic. When logic fails, go for the emotional jugular. I'll think about it, I said, which was true. I was definitely thinking about it, just not in the way she hoped. 10 minutes after I hung up, my phone lit up like a Christmas tree. 3 texts from Ria in rapid succession. We both embarrassed each other last night. Let's be adults. Brunch is 12. We're something decent. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I stared at those messages, marveling at the sheer audacity. We both embarrassed each other. Like my sitting there quietly while she performed a masterclass in psychological warfare was somehow equivalent to her actually performing said masterclass. Let's be adults. Because nothing says mature adult behavior, like publicly calling your boyfriend ugly and then sticking him with the bill for your friend's champagne tower. Don't make this harder than it has to be. As if I was the one making things difficult by having the nerve to object to being treated like a human ATM with low self-esteem. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened my laptop and started working on what Rafi would probably call the presentation materials. 20 minutes later, Amma texted me. Stand upright. 2 words. No explanation needed. My sister had a gift for cutting through bullshit and delivering exactly the message you needed to hear when you needed to hear it. Stand upright. Don't slouch into their expectations. Don't bend yourself into shapes that make other people comfortable. An hour after that, Rafi sent me a folder link labeled Bridge. I clicked it open to find something beautiful in its simplicity. A clean, professional slideshow that told the story of the past 2 years in dates, payments, screenshots, and captions. No editorializing, no emotional manipulation, just facts arranged in chronological order like evidence in a court case. The final slide was my favorite. A simple summary showing total amounts, broken down by category. Restaurants, $12,847. Entertainment, $8,394. Personal services, $6,223. Emergency assistance, $11,500. Total investment in relationship, $39,964. $39,964. Almost 40 grand spent on someone who thought calling me ugly in public was acceptable relationship behavior. Rafi had included a note at the bottom of the folder. You won't need to speak much. Let the room read. I closed the laptop and looked around my apartment, really looked at it. $40,000 could have bought a lot of things. A decent used car. A down payment on a better place. 6 months of not worrying about rent. Instead, it had bought me 2 years of systematic humiliation and the privilege of being someone's emotional punching bag. But you know what $40,000 had also bought me? A crystal clear understanding of exactly what I was worth to these people, and more importantly, what I was worth to myself. Sunday brunch was going to be very interesting indeed. Sunday morning hit different. You know that feeling when you're about to do something that's going to change everything, and your body can't decide whether to be terrified or exhilarated. That was me, standing in front of my bathroom mirror at 10:30 a.m., looking at a guy who'd finally stopped apologizing for taking up space in the world. I'd slept exactly 4 hours, but I felt more awake than I had in 2 years. Funny how clarity works. Once you stop lying to yourself about what you're willing to accept, everything else becomes remarkably simple. The drive to Ria's family house took 23 minutes, which gave me just enough time to practice not giving a shit about whatever performance was waiting for me. Their neighborhood is one of those places where the houses are so perfectly maintained they look like movie sets, where every lawn is exactly the right shade of green and every driveway could double as a luxury car showroom. The Patel house smelled like it always did, cardamom, jasmine, and the kind of furniture polish that costs more per bottle than most people spend on groceries. Everything was immaculate in that way that only happens when you pay someone else to maintain your immaculate lifestyle. Suraj answered the door with that particular brand of upper-class politeness that makes you feel welcomed and evaluated simultaneously. Julian, good to see you, son. The hug was brief but warm, the kind of embrace that said, I genuinely like you, but I'm not sure what's happening here. Thanks for having me, Mr. Patel, I said, because muscle memory dies hard, and I'd been playing the role of the grateful boyfriend for too long to just switch it off. He led me through the house to their conservatory, which is exactly as pretentious as it sounds. A glass-roofed dining room filled with carefully arranged flowers and furniture that probably costs more than my annual rent. The long table was already set for what looked like a small wedding reception, complete with cloth napkins and enough silverware to perform surgery. Ajay was already seated at her usual spot, and the moment she saw me, her face did that thing it always did, like she was reading a book written in a language only she understood. Julian Beta, she said, reaching up to pat my cheek with hands that felt like paper and warmth. You look thinner. Are you eating? That's a G for you. Cutting straight through all the social bullshit to ask the questions that actually matter. At 87 years old, she'd earned the right to say whatever she thought, and what she thought was usually more accurate than anyone else in the room. I'm eating fine, Ajay, I said, settling into the chair next to her, because that's where I always sat, and some habits are harder to break than others. She said, which in Ajay speak meant, I don't believe you, but I'll let it slide for now. Nalini appeared with her usual theatrical flourish, air-kissing my cheeks, while somehow managing to assess my outfit, my posture, and my general compliance level all at once. Julian, darling, so glad you could make it, she said, as if my attendance hadn't been a foregone conclusion in her mind. Wouldn't miss it, I said, which was technically true. I wouldn't have missed this for the world, just not for the reasons she thought. Ria arrived at 12:17, which was actually early for her, trailing Victor and Talia like some kind of social media entourage. She looked flawless, of course, hair perfectly styled, makeup that probably took an hour, wearing a sundress that cost more than most people's monthly car payments. The kind of effortless perfection that requires tremendous effort to maintain. "Sorry we're late," she said, not sounding sorry at all. Traffic was insane. This was followed by the familiar dance of air kisses and strategic positioning, making sure Victor got the seat with the best lighting for whatever content Talia was planning to capture. She didn't sit next to me. Instead, she claimed the chair across the table, where she could maintain eye contact while staying safely out of reach. Smart positioning for what she probably thought was going to be another performance of Julian's public rehabilitation. Brunch proceeded exactly as these things always did, a careful choreography of family dynamics disguised as a meal. Suraj talked about his latest business venture. Nalini discussed her charity work. Victor managed to work his cryptocurrency investments into every conversation, and Talia documented it all with the dedication of a war correspondent. The food was gorgeous, of course. Perfectly arranged fruit, artisanal pastries, organic, everything sourced from places that probably had their own publicists. The kind of spread that screams, "We have money and we want you to know it," while somehow maintaining the illusion of casual family togetherness. I ate quietly, answered when spoken to, and waited. Patience, I'd learned, was my secret weapon. When you're dealing with people who can't stand silence, sometimes the best strategy is to just wait. When the toast started, I knew we were getting close to showtime. Suraj raised his glass first, offering some generic blessing about family and health. Nalini followed with something about gratitude and new beginnings. Then Ria stood up, her glass catching the light streaming through the conservatory roof. "To shedding what no longer serves," she said, looking directly at me with that smile she used when she thought she was being clever. The phrase landed exactly like she intended, a verbal slap disguised as inspiration. Several sets of eyes slid my way, waiting to see how I'd react to being publicly categorized as something that no longer served her purposes. A G clicked her tongue, a sound that could have cut glass. "Food first, speeches later," she said firmly, because a G had zero patience for performative nonsense when there were samosas getting cold. I almost smiled. Almost. After dessert, some elaborate thing involving rose petals and gold leaf, because of course it did, Nalini launched into what was clearly the planned finale. "So," she said with that bright, artificial tone that meant business was about to commence, "let's hear some family news. Any updates, announcements, developments we should know about?" This was it. The moment they'd all been building toward, when I was supposed to apologize for Saturday night, promise to do better, maybe even propose to really seal the deal on my rehabilitation. The moment when Julian would once again demonstrate his willingness to absorb whatever punishment they deemed appropriate in exchange for the privilege of remaining in their orbit. Instead, I stood up, reached into my jacket pocket, and pulled out a small folder. "Actually," I said, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me, "I do have some family news to share." I handed copies down each side of the table like I was distributing communion wafers. Suraj took his with curious politeness. Nalini accepted hers with barely concealed irritation. Victor grabbed his with the eagerness of someone who loved drama, as long as he wasn't the star. Ajit examined hers like she was checking produce for ripeness. "These are just some documents I thought might interest everyone," I said, settling back into my chair. "Financial records, actually, from the past 2 years. The first page was the restaurant receipt from Saturday night. All 3 pages of it, itemized down to the last overpriced olive. The second page showed a timeline of similar charges, each one cross-referenced with social media posts that told a very different story than what I'd been told at the time. Page 3 was my personal favorite, a simple spreadsheet showing total amounts by category, with a running tally at the bottom that currently sat at $39,964. No commentary, no accusations, no emotional manipulation. Just paper with numbers and dates and facts that spoke louder than any speech I could have given. The silence that followed was the kind you usually only hear right before something very expensive breaks. Suraj's eyebrows had climbed halfway to his hairline. Nalini's jaw was working like she was chewing through steel. Victor had actually stopped looking at his phone, which might have been a first. And Ria? Ria's perfect smile flickered like a light bulb about to burn out, then snapped back into place with the kind of effort that made her eye twitch. "You're being dramatic," she said finally, reaching across the table toward my wrist with a gesture that was probably supposed to look affectionate, but came across more like someone trying to pet a potentially dangerous animal. I moved my arm away, gently, but definitively. Not angry, not aggressive, just done. Ajee was still reading, her ancient eyes moving slowly across each page like she was memorizing every detail. When she finished, she placed her weathered hand over mine and said one word that seemed to fill the entire conservatory. "Enough." She wasn't talking to me. You know what's funny about watching someone's carefully constructed reality crumble? It doesn't happen all at once like in the movies, with dramatic music and slow-motion devastation. It happens in real time, through smartphone notifications and social media deletions, and the kind of digital breadcrumbs that tell a story more honest than any confession. I woke up Tuesday morning to 139 missed calls. 139. I had to count them twice because that number seemed like something you'd make up to illustrate a point about modern communication overdose. But there they were, stacked in my call log like evidence of a psychological meltdown happening in real time across multiple area codes. The calls had started at 10:41 p.m. Monday night, right around the time Sloan posted that cryptic, yikes story that had disappeared faster than a decent man at one of Ria's dinner parties. They'd continued until 6:23 a.m., which meant someone had been hitting redial for almost 8 straight hours with the dedication of a stalker or a telemarketer with a cocaine habit. The breakdown went like this. Ria had called 73 times. 73. That's not desperation. That's a complete psychological break with reality disguised as persistence. Nalini had managed a respectable 21 attempts, while Suraj had shown more restraint with only 14 calls. Though knowing him, he'd probably been pacing his study and muttering in 3 languages while his wife worked her way through the contact list. Victor had called 18 times, which was about 17 more times than we'd ever spoken in 2 years of pretending to be friendly. Talia had managed 12 attempts, probably between editing Instagram stories and figuring out how to distance herself from whatever nuclear fallout was heading Ria's direction. The real surprise was Gideon. 2 calls from his office number and 1 from what I assumed was his personal cell. Gideon never called anyone directly. The man had assistants to schedule his bathroom breaks. If he was personally dialing my number, something significant had shifted in the corporate ecosystem. But the call that really caught my attention was from Mr. Chow at the restaurant. Because apparently, in the midst of this digital meltdown, someone had called Lumiere asking about Saturday night's receipt. Someone desperate enough to contact a restaurant staff about documentation they'd already provided to a customer who'd been publicly humiliated at their establishment. That level of panic suggested that my little presentation at Sunday brunch had done more damage than even I'd anticipated. I made coffee, the good stuff this time, because when your ex-girlfriend has a complete breakdown that generates 139 missed calls, you celebrate with beans that cost more than $3 a pound, and started working through the voicemail messages in chronological order. 10:41 p.m. Ria. Julian, what the fuck did you do? Gideon wants to see me first thing tomorrow, and he's asking questions about Mira and some bullshit about stolen work. Call me back. Now. 10:47 p.m. Ria, I know you're there. Pick up the fucking phone. Whatever game you think you're playing, it stops now. I'm serious, Julian. This isn't funny anymore. 10:52 p.m. Nalini. Julian, darling, I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding at Ria's work. Perhaps we could all sit down and discuss this like mature adults? Family is family, after all. 10:58 p.m. Ria, you pathetic little worm. You think you can destroy my career because your feelings got hurt? You think anyone cares about your sad little spreadsheets and your victim complex? The messages continued in this vein for hours, cycling through denial, anger, bargaining, more anger, threats, pleading, and eventually a kind of dissociative rambling that sounded like someone having a conversation with reality and losing badly. By 2 a.m., Ria's voice had gone hoarse from screaming into voicemail. You don't understand what you've done. I have worked so fucking hard to get where I am. I have sacrificed everything for this job, for this life, and you're going to ruin it all, because what? Because I called you ugly at dinner? Because I hurt your precious little feelings. 3:17 a.m. brought a moment of clarity. Julian, please. I know I said some things I shouldn't have. I know I haven't been fair. But this is my career we're talking about. My entire future. Can't we work something out? Can't we be adults about this? But by 4:33 a.m., she was back to pure rage. I will fucking destroy you. Do you hear me? I will make sure everyone knows what kind of person you really are. Petty, vindictive, pathetic. A man who can't handle being with a woman who's more successful than he is. The most telling message came at 5:46 a.m., when her voice had gone flat and exhausted. I loved you. I actually loved you. And this is how you repay me? By stabbing me in the back the first chance you get? I gave you everything, Julian. I brought you into my world, introduced you to my friends, shared my life with you. And this is how you thank me. I had to replay that 3 times, because the cognitive dissonance was so complete it felt like listening to someone describe a completely different relationship. She'd loved me. She'd given me everything. She'd shared her life with me. The woman who'd called me ugly in public, who'd systematically drained my bank account, who'd treated me like an embarrassing accessory she couldn't quite bring herself to get rid of. That woman thought she'd been generous with her affection. It was like listening to someone describe the color blue as red with complete conviction, so confident in their alternate reality that they couldn't conceive of anyone disagreeing with them. The voicemails from her family were more diplomatic, but no less revealing. Nalini's messages started with concern and escalated to barely concealed threats about reputation and consequences and what happens to people who bite the hand that feeds them. Suraj's calls were more direct, disappointment, confusion, and a growing edge of anger as he realized that the quiet, respectful man he'd welcomed into his family had been systematically documenting his daughter's behavior. Victor's messages were pure damage control. Dude, I don't know what your end game is here, but you need to think about what you're doing. Ria's got friends, Julian. Important friends. This isn't going to end the way you think it's going to end. But it was Talia's messages that really painted the picture of a social ecosystem in full collapse. Her first call was confusion. Julian, what's happening? Everyone's freaking out, and no one's telling me why. By her fourth call, she was in full self-preservation mode. Look, I don't know what went down between you and Ria, but I need to protect my brand here. I can't be associated with whatever drama this is turning into. The machine was sputtering, just like I'd hoped. When your entire social structure is built on image and perception, the truth landing in the wrong place at the wrong time can bring down the whole ecosystem faster than a house of cards in an earthquake. I spent the morning systematically blocking numbers and deleting voicemails, keeping only the most illuminating examples from my own records. Not because I planned to use them. I'm not that vindictive, but because sometimes you need proof that you didn't imagine how crazy someone can get when their carefully maintained facade starts cracking. At 11:30 a.m., my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, assuming it was another member of Ria's panic network calling from a borrowed phone. But something made me pick up. Julian Martinez? The voice was professional, calm, completely unlike the hysteria I'd been fielding all morning. Yeah, that's me. This is David Chun. I'm an attorney with Morrison, Klein & Associates. I represent Gideon Morrison and his firm. Mr. Morrison asked me to reach out to you regarding some documentation you provided yesterday evening. My stomach did a little flip, because having a lawyer call you is never a good sign, even when you're pretty sure you haven't done anything illegal. Okay, I said, because sometimes the best response is to shut up and let the other person talk first. Mr. Morrison wanted me to thank you for bringing certain irregularities to his attention. The documentation you provided regarding Ms. Patel and her former employee has been very illuminating. He also wanted to assure you that your cooperation in this matter is appreciated and will be kept confidential. Translation: Gideon had looked at Myra's evidence, realized he had a serious problem on his hands, and was now in full damage control mode. Thanking me for my cooperation was lawyer speak for "please don't sue us or talk to reporters." Is Mira okay? I asked, because that was really the only part of this situation I actually cared about. Ms. Chun? Yes, she's fine. In fact, Mr. Morrison has asked me to extend an offer for her to return to the firm in a more appropriate position, with a significant adjustment to her compensation package. Apparently, Her work was quite impressive once it was properly attributed. I almost smiled. Mira was going to be fine. Better than fine, probably. Companies that get caught stealing from their employees tend to be very generous when they're trying to avoid lawsuits and bad publicity. And Ms. Patel? There was a pause that told me everything I needed to know. Ms. Patel's employment status is being reviewed. I'm not at liberty to discuss the details, but I can say that Mr. Morrison takes these matters very seriously. Ria was done. Not just fired, probably being investigated, possibly facing legal action, definitely persona non grata in the professional world she'd worked so hard to dominate. The woman who'd built her career on stolen work and systematic manipulation had finally met someone who cared more about documentation than reputation. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen looking at my phone, which had mercifully stopped ringing for the first time in 18 hours. The apartment felt different, lighter, somehow, like a pressure I hadn't realized I'd been carrying had suddenly lifted. I thought about Ria, probably sitting in her perfect apartment, staring at her perfect phone, watching her perfect life collapse one deleted Instagram story at a time. Part of me, a very small part, almost felt sorry for her. She'd never learned the difference between being loved and being tolerated, between earning respect and demanding it, between building something real and just performing success until everyone believed the performance. But mostly, I felt relief. The kind of bone-deep relief that comes when you finally stop trying to fix something that was broken from the beginning, when you stop apologizing for existing and start insisting on being treated like a human being with actual worth. My phone buzzed once more, a text from Alma. Heard through the grapevine that someone's having a very bad day. You okay? I typed back, better than okay. Free. She sent back a single emoji, a bird in flight. That evening, I took the white lilies, which had somehow managed to stay beautiful despite everything that had happened since I'd brought them home, to the park and left them by the pond. Not for Ria, not as some gesture of forgiveness or closure, just for no one in particular, because beautiful things deserve to exist without having to justify themselves or prove their worth to anyone. I walked home lighter than I'd felt in 2 years. Not victorious. Victory implies there was some kind of contest, and this hadn't been a contest. It had been an education, a long overdue lesson in what happens when someone mistakes patience for weakness, kindness for stupidity, and love for permission to treat another human being like disposable entertainment. The truth, I discovered, wasn't something you had to fight for or argue about or justify to anyone. You just had to stop hiding from it, stop making excuses for it, stop pretending it wasn't there. Everything else took care of itself. The thing about not chasing people who are actively self-destructing is that it gives you an incredible amount of mental real estate to work with. While Ria was apparently calling every number in her contacts list like some kind of emotional telemarketer having a complete breakdown, I was discovering what it felt like to wake up without that low-grade anxiety that had become my normal background noise for the past 2 years. Wednesday morning hit different. No phantom phone buzzing. No wondering what fresh humiliation the day would bring. No mentally calculating whether I could afford whatever emergency Ria would inevitably manufacture by lunchtime. Just coffee, actual breakfast instead of stress-induced starvation, and the weird luxury of not having to manage someone else's emotions before I'd even brushed my teeth. I had exactly one item on my agenda for the day, and it was something I'd been putting off since Sunday: returning the engagement ring. Yeah, there was an engagement ring. Because apparently, somewhere in the middle of being systematically drained and publicly humiliated, I convinced myself that the solution to dating someone who treated me like a human ATM was to legally bind myself to her forever. The ring was sitting in a small velvet box in my sock drawer, where it had been hiding like a guilty secret since I'd bought it 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks ago, when I was still operating under the delusion that Ria's cruelty was just a phase, that her casual abuse was somehow evidence of intimacy, that if I just proved my commitment thoroughly enough, she'd magically transform into someone capable of basic human decency. The ring had cost me 4 months of car payments and 6 months of eating ramen for lunch, but I convinced myself it was an investment in our future. Because that's what you do when you're so deep in someone else's dysfunction that you mistake suffering for love. You double down, you escalate. You throw good money after bad while telling yourself that this time will be different. Looking at that little velvet box now was like looking at evidence of temporary insanity. What kind of man proposes to someone who calls him ugly in public? What kind of future was I planning to build with someone who saw my generosity as weakness and my kindness as stupidity? But that was the old Julian. The guy who thought he could love someone into treating him better, who confused patience with masochism, who believed that accepting abuse was somehow noble. The new Julian, the one who discovered that standing up for himself didn't actually cause the world to end, had different priorities. I called a G first, because she was the only person in Ria's family who'd ever treated me like I was worth more than my credit limit. A G, it's Julian, I said when she answered on the second ring. Beta, she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. I was hoping you would call. Are you all right? I'm good, I said, and realized it was true. Actually, I'm better than I've been in a long time. But I wanted to ask you something. I have something that belongs to your family, and I'd like to return it this afternoon. Would that be okay? There was a pause, the kind that happens when someone who's lived 87 years instantly understands exactly what you're talking about without you having to explain it. Of course, Beta. Would you like to come for tea? We can sit in the garden. That would be nice, I said, because Ajiz's garden was probably the only place in the Patel house where I could have a conversation without feeling like I was being evaluated by a panel of judges. Julian, she said before I could hang up. Yeah, G. Thank you for being honest. It takes courage to tell the truth when everyone around you is living in lies. I hung up feeling lighter already, like I'd just received absolution from the one person whose opinion actually mattered in this whole mess. The rest of the morning was dedicated to what I was mentally calling Operation Clean Slate, the systematic removal of Ria from my life in all its tedious, practical details. I called my bank to confirm the final closure of the compromised credit card and to remove her as an authorized user on my account. The customer service representative was so helpful I almost felt bad for her. She had no idea she was assisting in the financial equivalent of a witness protection program. I signed the cancellation paperwork for the gym membership I'd never used but had maintained because Ria liked their towels and their smoothie bar and the way she could post Instagram stories about couples' workouts while I sat in my car in the parking lot reading a book. $68 a month for 2 years, just so she could have access to towels that were apparently softer than the ones normal people used. Then I tackled the hardest part, packing up her things. 2 years of someone gradually colonizing your space leaves a lot of archaeological evidence. Her expensive face cream in my bathroom medicine cabinet. Her yoga mat rolled up in my closet like some kind of exercise-themed accusation. A drawer full of designer underwear that cost more per piece than I usually spent on a week's worth of groceries. I packed everything carefully, methodically, like I was curating a museum exhibit about the life and times of a relationship that should have ended 18 months earlier. Each item went into neat boxes labeled with her name and the date, because even when I'm removing someone toxic from my life, I apparently can't help but be organized about it. The hardest thing to pack was a framed photo from last Christmas, Ria and me at her family's holiday party, both of us smiling like we were auditioning for a stock photo about successful young couples. She looked radiant. I looked grateful to be included, and anyone looking at the picture would have assumed we were disgustingly happy together. What the photo didn't show was that it had been taken 10 minutes after she'd hissed at me for embarrassing her by talking to her cousin about my job, because apparently being a high school teacher was too pedestrian to discuss at family gatherings. The smile on my face in that picture was 90% relief that she was speaking to me again and 10% the kind of desperate hope that makes you accept behavior you'd never tolerate from a stranger. I put the photo in the box face down, because even though I was done with Ria, I wasn't quite ready to look at visual evidence of my own willful blindness. By 2 p.m., I had 3 boxes stacked by my front door, each one representing a different category of items she'd left behind. Clothes, toiletries, and what I was generously calling miscellaneous personal effects, but was really expensive shit I couldn't afford to replace if she decided to claim I'd stolen it. I called my building's doorman, explained the situation in the vaguest possible terms, and arranged for the boxes to be left with the front desk for pickup. I even took photos of each sealed box for my records, because 2 years of dating someone who treated truth like a suggestion had taught me to document everything. The last step was the email. One final communication that would establish clear boundaries and protect me from whatever legal or financial fallout might be heading my way. I spent 45 minutes crafting it, editing it, making sure every word was professional, factual, and completely free of the emotional language she could twist into evidence of my instability. Dear Ria, Nalini, and Suraj, it began because I'd learned that keeping families in the loop prevents a lot of unnecessary drama later. I have arranged for your belongings to be available for pickup at my building's front desk. Please coordinate with the doorman for retrieval. Regarding the financial discrepancies we discussed on Sunday, I have prepared a repayment schedule for the portions charged to my accounts that appear to have been for personal rather than shared expenses. This schedule reflects a reasonable timeline for reimbursement and is based on documented charges with supporting evidence. Going forward, I believe it would be best for all parties if future communication is limited to email only, and only regarding practical matters related to the resolution of shared financial obligations. I wish you all the best. Julian. Attached to the email was a spreadsheet that would have made Rafi proud. 3 pages of itemized charges, organized by date and category, with a suggested payment plan that worked out to about $400 a month for the next 7 years. Not because I expected to actually see that money, I'm not delusional, but because putting it in writing established that I understood the difference between gifts freely given and money taken under false pretenses. The repayment schedule was my insurance policy, my documentation that I wasn't just a bitter ex-boyfriend making wild accusations, but someone who had legitimate financial grievances and was approaching them through proper channels. After I sent the email, I grabbed my keys and headed to Ajay's house, the little velvet box burning a hole in my jacket pocket like radioactive evidence of my former stupidity. The Patel house looked different in the afternoon light, less intimidating, somehow, like a movie set between takes when all the actors have gone home and left behind just furniture and empty rooms. Ajay's garden was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent decades nurturing things. Organized chaos, beautiful flowers mixed with practical herbs, the kind of space that felt alive in a way that perfectly curated spaces never do. She was waiting for me at a small table under an old oak tree, tea service already prepared, wearing a cotton sari that had probably cost less than Ria spent on a single lunch, but looked infinitely more elegant. Sit, Beta, she said, patting the chair across from her. Tell me how you are. I'm learning, I said, accepting the cup of tea she poured with hands that were steady for the first time in weeks. Learning what it feels like to wake up without wondering what I did wrong yesterday. She nodded like this made perfect sense. And what have you learned? That I'm not actually grateful someone like Ria dated me, I said, pulling out the ring box and placing it gently on the table between us. I'm grateful I figured that out before I made it permanent. Ajay looked at the box for a long moment, then opened it to reveal the ring I'd spent months saving for. A modest but decent stone in a classic setting, the kind of ring that says, I love you, without screaming, look how much money I spent. It's beautiful, she said simply. She would have said it was too small. That was a G for you, cutting straight to the heart of things with surgical precision. The ring wasn't too small by any reasonable standard, but in Ria's world, where everything was performance and nothing was ever quite enough, it would have been evidence of my insufficient appreciation for her worth. She would have posted it on social media and made jokes about starter rings and how she was training me to do better next time. I said, the words coming out easier than they would have a week ago. Yes, Ajay agreed. And you would have apologized and promised to upgrade it for your anniversary, and then apologized again when the upgraded ring wasn't perfect enough either. The accuracy of that prediction was so complete it felt like being read by a fortune teller who'd already lived through your future. How did you know? I asked. Because I raised that girl, Ajay said, closing the ring box with a gentle click. I love her, but I am not blind to what she became. Somewhere along the way, she learned that taking was easier than earning, that performing was safer than being real. And once you learn those lessons, it's very hard to unlearn them. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking tea in a garden that smelled like jasmine and forgiveness, while the afternoon light filtered through leaves that had been growing on that tree since before either of us was born. What will you do now? She asked eventually. Live, I said. Just live. Wake up, go to work, Have conversations with people who don't think my existence is something they're doing me a favor by tolerating. Maybe date someone who thinks I'm worth more than my credit limit. That sounds like a good plan, she said, slipping the ring box into her purse like it was any other family heirloom being returned to its proper place. Julian. Yeah, G. You are a good man. Not perfect. No one is perfect, but good, kind, patient, honest. These are valuable qualities, even if my granddaughter was too foolish to see their worth. I felt something loosen in my chest that I hadn't even realized was there, some final knot of doubt about whether I really deserved better treatment, whether my expectations were reasonable, whether standing up for myself made me the villain in someone else's story. Thank you, I said, for everything. For being kind to me when your family didn't have to be. For seeing me as a person instead of just an accessory. You were never an accessory, Beta. You were the best thing that happened to this family in years. We just forgot to tell you that often enough. The drive home was peaceful in a way I'd forgotten was possible. No anxiety about what mood Rio would be in when I got back. No mental calculations about what the evening would cost or what social performance would be expected of me. Just the simple pleasure of driving through a city that felt like it belonged to me again. Instead of being enemy territory, I had to navigate carefully. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 2 years. I ordered pizza and watched a movie that I actually wanted to see. Not because Rio was busy, not because she was out with her friends, not because she was giving me the silent treatment over some imagined slight. Just because it was Wednesday night, and I felt like eating pizza and watching a stupid action movie with explosions and a happy ending. My phone stayed mercifully quiet. No calls, no texts, no social media notifications from people I barely knew informing me about drama I no longer cared about. Just silence, broken only by the sound of my own laughter at jokes that were actually funny instead of cruel. Around 10 p.m., Mira sent me a text. Started my new job today. Corner office, 40% raise, and a boss who reads emails before taking credit for them. Thank you for believing me when I couldn't believe myself. I smiled and typed back. You did the hard part. You kept the records. You told the truth. You didn't let them convince you that their version of reality was the only one that mattered. Still, she replied, if you ever need a reference for being a decent human being, I know where to find documentation. At 10:30, my sister called. How'd it go today? Amma asked, because she always knows when something significant is happening in your life, even when you don't tell her directly. Good, I said. Really good. I feel like I've been holding my breath for 2 years and finally remembered how to exhale. And the ring. Returned to sender with no forwarding address. She laughed. The kind of laugh that says, I'm proud of you for finally figuring out what the rest of us could see from space. What's next? She asked. I don't know, I said, and realized that for the first time in years, not knowing felt like possibility instead of anxiety. Maybe nothing dramatic. Maybe just living like someone who deserves to be treated well. Maybe dating someone who thinks I'm attractive.